Hey, Robert,
Hi, Jack.
you know jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
Funny.
It actually can't, though. Jet fuel burns at about 1250 degrees Fahrenheit, while steel becomes molten at double that number, 2500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode in the Fruitfully Honest podcast series 9/11 Building 7. I am your host, Robert Jones, along with my co host,
Jack Caroselli.
and we're here to rock your world.
Okay, so let's just sort of get down to business here. Last episode, we just kind of went over everything shortly and kind of just described little bits and pieces of every little thing. And this episode, I think we mentioned it in the last episode, we're going to be talking about the engineering aspect and whether or not we kind of think what they said happened is even possible. So, the first thing, as you saw in that little intro, is steel beams, the steel that they use, it becomes molten at 2500 degrees Fahrenheit, and jet fuel burns at 1250 degrees Fahrenheit. That right
So-
there says something.
So, Jack, what you're clearly saying is that during 9/11 and all the buildings that were hit, jet fuel cannot melt steel beams?
Right. There's no way that it could have compromised the steel that held up the buildings. And it's even worse for Building 7 because it wasn't actually hit directly by a plane. So no jet fuel even got on the building. It could have maybe sprayed a little bit, but it would have had to be only a little bit. So jet fuel wasn't even a thing that happened with Building 7. I did find out that fire becomes a thing, if you will, at about 752 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's when it just starts to glow orange. And that's apparently, it doesn't have to start a fire, it can be gradual too. So, Building 7, I created a diagram because I wanted to know about like everything, where all the planes hit, where Building 7 was, and Building 7 was across the street.
Really?
Yeah, from the complex. There's the North and South Tower and a couple other buildings, and then Building 7 is across the street from those. And what I found out is that I looked at which face the planes entered, and there was no real route or way for debris from the plane to hit the building.
So, well, then how did it fall?
Well, they set off as fires, and I'll get to that in a second. But basically, what I think damaged the building at all is when the North Tower collapsed. Building 7 did take a little damage to its structure, but in my opinion, nothing that could bring it down in 6.5 seconds, which is the rate of free fall. So I made that little diagram and basically came to realize that there's no way that pieces from the plane could have hit the building at high speed and compromised anything. And there's no way that a building that was right next to one of the towers, right next to it in the same like city block, doesn't fall, but a building across the street does, which was something that was weird to me.
So I'm looking at the information that we have written down, and jet fuel melts at 1,250 degrees Fahrenheit,
Right.
and a fire starts at 752 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. That's just like the base temperature.
Okay, those are the base temperatures. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that it was, I don't know, a detonation?
I mean, that's what I'm coming down to. There was something that happened to us, and you know about this. We had, what's his title? I don't know exactly.
Principle.
He's the principal for, I think, maybe the freshman class. And his name's Mr. Well, I won't say his name.
Yeah, I don't say
But he's a good guy, so it's not like we're
Very
hiding.
good guy.
Yeah,
I
it's
like
not.
his
We're not hiding
wife.
his
She's
name
a nice teacher.
because he's mean or anything, but just for his respect, we won't say his name. And he was in our classroom, and our teacher had us explain to him what we were doing. And when we talked about this whole theory we had, he was very much against it. However, most of the people I come across that are against it don't really have a lot of information that they can use to reject it. They just have that overall well, no. And then when I present them with my research, they're just like, whatever, dude.
But
So,
I think he had a pretty, I think he had a pretty good argument.
yeah,
Like,
he has a good base of knowledge. But what happened was, and the thing that I'm hitting on here, we showed him the footage of the Building 7 collapse, and we asked him about a little bit of like debris and dust that was sort of expelling out the top. And he was like, well, that's just release of pressure and debris in there. And then he looks at Robert and I and says, look up a video of a controlled detonation, a controlled demolition. And in my head, alarms were going off.
We're like, that's what that is. It's a controlled demolition.
Exactly. So we didn't, and I want to make this clear, we didn't actually say the words controlled detonation. Anytime in that conversation, we didn't tell him what our theory was. And this is why I think that's big, because when he saw the footage of that, that was the first thing he thought of, was a controlled demolition, which is why I think that's what it is. And around 3:30 p.m. on that day, they actually evacuated the entire area. They stopped searches and everything like that. The commissioner of the New York Fire Department pulled all the operations, and it was kind of on like orders from the mayor. So
what you're saying is that he took everybody out as a way to protect everybody from the demolition that they knew was coming.
Right. Also, even if you didn't look at it in that way, what they say happened is they thought the building was unstable and, quote, that it could cave to one side or collapse. And the piece cave to one side is big to me because that could happen, theoretically. If a structure is compromised on one side, it could cave down and sort of bend and fall over. But when you have a floor-by-floor collapse, almost like it's just like a stack of crackers and you just take one out from the other really fast. That's a weird analogy. But for me to look at cave to one side and what really happened is kind of weird. Now, voice crack, sorry there. A lot of people don't really know much about the rate of free fall. It's still kind of weird to me, the whole thing with acceleration and physics. I'm not 100% with, but I did find a couple things, and World Trade Center Building 7 fell at 6.3 seconds.
Yes, it did.
And it fell, that's how fast it fell, excuse me. And a lot of scientists and people who have the same opinion we do go and state the fact that that is the rate of free fall. And when I say the rate of free fall, I don't mean speed. So not everything falls in 6.3 seconds, but it's a proportion to your mass. And so what I found out is that the base rate of free fall is 9.8 meters per second per second.
So are you saying that the Building 7 fell quicker than the rate of free fall?
It fell about at the rate of free fall.
Okay. Very interesting.
Basically, what happens with free fall is if you drop an elephant and a paper clip, they don't fall at the same speed per se, but the same rate they do for their mass.
Yeah.
Because the elephant would have a higher gravitational pull to Earth because its mass is higher. Obviously, the paper clip doesn't. So it's obviously the benchmark for 1 gram or whatever we were taught in 3rd grade. But so it's sort of a proportional thing. It's not a certain speed. It's a rate of speed based on mass. And that's what Building 7 did. It fell at the rate of free fall. And I just really have a hard time believing that office fires could cause that dramatic of a collapse.
Well, there's been various accounts through history with the Windsor building on February the 12th, 2005, where these buildings were on fire for hours upon hours before they fell down. And Building 7 was on fire for a couple hours.
Yeah, the Windsor building actually didn't even have a full collapse. That's a 32-story building that was in Madrid, Spain, and I don't know exactly when the fire started, but it started and burned throughout the night. There were over 100 firefighters that were trying to fight it and keep it from spreading to other buildings. So they weren't necessarily even trying to put it out. They were just trying to contain it, which is a lot of times what you do with a big fire. And at one point, The whole top 10 stories were engulfed in flames. We're not talking look through the window, you can see a couple specks of fire, which
Yeah.
is what
We're
happened with
talking
Building 7.
about we're talking about Goku like hair, fire,
Super
like,
Saiyan.
Super Saiyan.
It's getting real.
Yeah, it's getting yeah.
So that, and basically the outcome of that is, I think, the like a top corner of the building crumbled off.
Yeah.
Because it also was the building is not made out of steel beams. It's made out of steel reinforced concrete, which is like the concrete with the steel rods running through. I think that's what that is. So maybe that I could see the crumbling aspect there. If the concrete's compromised, it could crumble away. But what I want to say is that Building 7 burned for maybe, let's say, 7 hours at most.
Yeah.
And this building burned for upwards of 15 to 18 hours through the night and still stood. And I'm pretty sure it's an older building. It was built in 1977 or something, which is around the time of Building 7.
The whole World Trade Center area was built in the early 80s, I do believe.
Right, yeah.
So.
Late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
So it's a good comparison to make. And the Windsor building still stood. It had major fires. We're not talking a few office fires. The whole building was engulfed, and only a piece of it crumbled away. And I'm not sure why that didn't happen with Building 7 if it was innocent office fires.
Because if you look at just the video of Building 7 upon its falling, there's fires on one side of the building. Like, it's not the whole building engulfed with fires.
Right.
It's just a certain section. So how does a certain section cause a whole building, the rest of the buildings that have not been hit by fire, to fall down? That's what we're trying to discover.
Yeah. And so there's a picture out there. There's multiple pictures, obviously, but it's a side view of, I think it's the southwest face of the tower, because it was pointing southwest. And you can see like a couple floors and a couple windows. There's fire. And as a comparison of the Windsor building, I mean, it was like fireworks in the night compared to a couple floors had some minor fires. And for the government to tell me that that's what happened and expect me to believe that is a little bit offensive almost.
Yeah. Well, and then also, this just shows the level of trust that the people have for the government and the level of trust that the government has for the people. The government thinks that people should not be entitled to know every little thing that's happening with our country, even though it's a matter of national security. And I have a theory on the situation, the whole 9/11 situation. I think it was a way for the government to infringe on people's rights in a way. It made the government able to say, well, we're going to have to search you all the time, and we're going to have to take up all these security measures to keep everybody safe, so that they could see what's going on inside people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, you ask these adults, like our parents or some of you guys out there that might be that were sort of around, if you will, during 9/11. Me and Robert weren't. We were only a couple years old, so I don't really remember much from that day at all.
I don't remember
Nothing.
anything.
So it's not like, and I don't want people to take that the wrong way and look at us and say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. They didn't live it. But what I want to say before we go is I do think this building was a controlled demolition, and I think it was part of a plot for the government to systematically brainwash the country into a political racism against the Middle East. And
it was also another way for them to go to war with the Middle East.
Right, because they had something that we wanted, and that's oil. And, okay, so one last little fact, because I can hear it now in the comments, is that people could say, okay, steel beam becomes molten at 2,500 degrees, but jet fuel's about half. I'm sure it could be softened by then. Well, yeah, steel could be definitely softened and maybe bend a little bit, but how can you sit there and tell me that softened steel is falling at the speed of free fall?
Yep. So, ladies and gentlemen, until next time.